Some characters inspire us because they're powerful. Then there's characters like Mulan who inspire us because they are terrified, misread, and out of place. And yet they choose to keep trucking along. Mulan isn't the story of someone who always knew who she was. It's the story about someone who was failing at the version of themselves that the world demanded, and then discovering that under pressure, she wasn't weak. She was just miscast. So, if you've ever felt split between who you are, who you perform, and who you might become when life leaves you no room to hide, then pull up a chair, because today we are dissecting the character of Mulan. And we are going to talk Disney, because let's be honest, for most of us, this movie raised us emotionally, spiritually, and with the unrealistic expectation that our ancestors would send us a tiny dragon with ADHD. Today, we are exploring where Mulan's story actually comes from, what Disney changed and why that matters, and why Mulan remains one of the most psychologically rich identity stories in animation. So let's get into it. Welcome back, fellow mages, to the Grounded Mage, where we explore how myth and magic exist in everyday life. Before Disney gave us Mushu, songs, and one of the best I'm about to disappoint my family montages in cinema, Mulan comes from a much older Chinese legend. The earliest known version is usually traced to the Ballad of Mulan, a folk poem believed to date back to the Northern Wei dynasty, roughly between the 4th and 6th centuries BC. In the original ballad, Mulan hears that her elderly father is being conscripted for war. She disguises herself as a man, takes his place, serves in the army for many years, becomes highly respected, and then when she's offered reward or office after, she declines. She goes home and she puts on her old clothes, and only then do her comrades know she's a woman. Which is pretty iconic. Imagine fighting beside someone for 12 years and then going, wait, you're telling me this quiet, competent soldier was carrying this entire platoon and a secret identity? There's no Mushu in the original ballad. There's no Li Shang romance arc, no matchmaking disaster with a cricket-based emotional support system. The original story is leaner, more solemn, and more symbolic. And that matters because at its core, Mulan is not just a warrior tale. It's a story about filial devotion, social role disruption, gendered expectations, and then the unsettling truth that competence can force society to confront limits of its own categories. Disney's 1998 version keeps the skeleton. A father at risk, daughter takes his place, disguised military service, eventual revelation, saving the empire. But Disney makes one huge thematic shift. The old ballad asks, what does duty require? Disney asks, what happens when your true self can't survive the role you've been assigned? And honestly, for me, that's catnip. When we meet Disney's Mulan, she's not rebellious in the loud, swaggering, I reject all norms way. She's trying. That's important. She studies the notes written on her arm. She rehearses what to say. She wants to honor her family. She wants to be good. She's not mocking the system because she thinks she's above it. She's suffering under it because she cares. It's one of the most psychologically honest things about her. It's also where we can bring in Erving Goffman's theory that social life is a performance. In The Presentation of Everyday Life, Goffman argues that we all manage impressions depending on the audience. In other words, there's a front stage self, the polished, acceptable, legible version, and the backstage self, where the real confusion, emotion, improvisation, and contradiction live. Mulan's opening is practically a masterclass in this. At the matchmaker, her posture is corrected, her speech is controlled, her femininity is ritualized, her body's regulated, and her behavior is scripted. She's not just being taught how to be a woman. She's being taught how to be a socially acceptable performance of womanhood. And she fails spectacularly, which, first of all, is so great. And second, that failure is deeply important. Sometimes what looks like not fitting in is actually just a mismatch between authentic temperament and rigid social scripting. This also connects to gender role socialization and Judith Butler's idea of gender performativity. The concept that gender isn't just something we are, but something we repeatedly enact through behaviors, expectations, gestures, and sanctions. Mulan's body language, her speech, even the way she's dressed and handled in that scene all communicate one thing. Your value depends on whether you can successfully perform the approved script. And when she can't, the shame is immediate. And it's not just personal shame, it's relational shame. The matchmaker actually comes out into a public setting where hundreds of people have gathered and shouts about Mulan's failure in front of everyone. So now she thinks she's dishonored her entire family. And psychologically, that is huge. It's also where self-discrepancy theory comes in, developed by Ettore Higgins. The theory says distress often comes from the gap between the actual self, who you feel you are, the ideal self, who you wish you could be, and the ought self, which is who you believe you are supposed to be. Mulan's pain early in the movie is basically her actual self, creative, impulsive, compassionate, observant, unconventional. Her ought self, obedient, graceful, socially perfect, marriageable daughter. And her ideal self, someone who brings honor and makes her family proud, all fighting amongst themselves. And because they don't line up, she feels fractured, which leads us to one of Disney's most psychologically devastating bangers, Reflection. And the song isn't subtle. Disney basically said, what if we put identity diffusion in a pond and make it gorgeous? Who is that girl I see staring straight back at me? It's not just insecurity, it's identity alienation. That's the feeling of, I can perform a version of myself for others, but I don't feel fully visible inside of it. And if you've ever had a job, a family role, a religious role, a social mask, a gendered expectation, or a people-pleasing era, you know exactly what that feels like. Now we get to where things pick up. The conscription order arrives, and suddenly the abstract pain of not fitting in becomes a moral crisis. Her father, older, injured, clearly vulnerable, is expected to serve. Now, from a family systems perspective, this is where Mulan's role changes. In Bowen family systems theory, individuals don't act in isolation. They act within emotional systems shaped by loyalty, anxiety, hierarchy, and role expectations. Mulan's family is organized around honor, duty, sacrifice, and generational continuity. Her father is willing to die because that is the role that was assigned to him. Mulan disobeys because she sees something that the system won't admit. The role is killing the person. And it's such a profound human moment. Sometimes maturity is not obeying the role. Sometimes maturity is recognizing when the role has become cruel. So she cuts her hair, she takes the armor, and she leaves. And Disney stages this almost like a ritual death and rebirth scene. This is classic hero's journey energy. Ordinary world, refusal or failure in the social order, call to adventure, crossing the threshold through disguise and sacrifice. But psychologically, it's also identity foreclosure being shattered. In developmental psychology, especially in Erickson and James Marsh's work on identity formation, identity foreclosure is when someone adopts an identity handed to them by authority without fully exploring alternatives. Mulan has been handed a script: daughter, future wife, vessel of family honor. But crisis forces exploration. And exploration is messy. It often starts not with confidence, but with desperation. A lot of people don't find themselves because they read a vision board under moonlight. A lot of people find themselves because life corners them and says, well, if your mask can't survive this, who can? Now we get to training camp. And if the matchmaker scene was a performance of femininity, training camp is the performance of masculinity on steroids. In I'll Make a Man Out of You, masculinity is defined through endurance, aggression, emotional stoicism, discipline, speed, strength, conformity to warrior ideals. It's not just about skill. It's about belonging through performance. This maps seamlessly onto social identity theory. People derive part of their identity from the groups they belong to. Groups have norms. To stay in the group, you internalize or at least perform those norms. Mulan, as Ping, is not just learning to fight. She's learning how to move, how to take up space, how to avoid scrutiny, how to code switch for survival. And if you've ever had to alter your voice, body language, wardrobe, or emotional expression to fit into a workplace, school, family, or social group, then Mulan in camp hits hard. This is also a great moment to talk about minority stress. Not in a simplistic one-to-one mapping, but as a framework. Minority stress theory explores how chronic vigilance, concealment, and fear of rejection can create an extra psychological burden for people whose identity is stigmatized or unsafe in any given environment. Mulan's entire camp experience involves concealment, hypervigilance, performance monitoring, threat of expulsion or worse, and the exhausting labor of constant self-regulation. That's not just she's pretending. That's her surviving under surveillance. And what's brilliant is she doesn't even succeed by becoming the strongest brute in the room. She succeeds through pattern recognition, persistence, creativity, and adaptive thinking. The arrow and pole scene is everything. Everyone else uses raw force. Mulan pauses. She thinks. She reframes the problem. And then uses the weights as tools. It's a perfect example of something we use in education a lot, which is growth mindset and cognitive flexibility. Carol Dweck's work on mindset suggests that people who see ability as developable, I'm pretty sure that's a word, tend to persist, experiment, and learn from failure. Mulan gets humiliated repeatedly, but she never sits back and says, I am inherently incapable. She says, I just haven't figured the system out yet. And quite frankly, it's one of the best lessons in the entire movie, because sometimes what looks like incompetence is just being in the wrong environment, using the wrong metric, being taught with the wrong teaching style, or a problem that rewards a different kind of intelligence. Mulan is not weak. She's just in a world that's designed to misread her strengths until the stakes become undeniable. Here's what makes Mulan psychologically brilliant. She doesn't become powerful by finally being accepted as herself right away. She becomes powerful while she's still misrecognized, while she's still hidden, while she's still performing, which means the central question of Mulan isn't just, can she do it? It's, what happens when the self that proves its worth is not the self that the world will allow to exist? And that is where this story stops becoming a fun Disney classic and starts to feel painfully adult. The mountain battle is a turning point. Mulan saves the army not by overpowering Shan Yu directly, but through strategy. She causes the avalanche. Again, not with brute strength, but with adaptive intelligence under extreme stress. And this lines up perfectly on resilience and stress response flexibility. The healthiest stress responses aren't always fight harder. Often they involve rapid appraisal, creative problem solving, situational awareness, and the ability to act despite fear. Mulan is afraid all the time. Courage is not lack of fear. It's the willingness to act while afraid. Then she gets injured, and suddenly all of her contribution is erased by the revelation that she's a woman. That's devastating, but psychologically very familiar. This is status fragility. She was valued when categorized one way, and the moment that category changes, the meaning of her behavior changes too. Same competence, different social label, different treatment. And this is where role congruity theory is powerful. This theory suggests that prejudice emerges when there's a mismatch between stereotypes of a group and stereotypes of a role. In Mulan's case, woman is culturally coded as one thing, warrior is coded as another. So even proven excellence is rejected because it violates the expected role. She literally saved them, and the system still says, yeah, but you broke the category. And that lands because how many of us have experienced that? The capable woman is dismissed because she's too much. The sensitive man is treated as weak. The creative kid is called lazy, or the neurodivergent adult is called difficult. Mulan's exile after heroism is one of the most emotionally mature moments in the film because it shows that recognition is not the same as acceptance. And achievement does not automatically dismantle bias. And that's a brutally real lesson. And then, because Disney understands symbolic poetry, Mulan saves China again. Only this time, not as Ping, but as herself. And that matters more than the avalanche. When she returns to warn everybody, she's dismissed at first, but eventually she leads the strategy in the Imperial City. And the final confrontation is genius because it completely flips the gender scripts the film has been interrogating all along. To infiltrate the palace, the men dress in women's clothing, rigid gender presentation becomes a tactical costume, masculinity and femininity are revealed as socially legible performances rather than sacred truths, and the film quietly says, see, the categories were never as stable as you thought. It's actually really clever. And by the end, Mulan doesn't win because she's fully transformed into the ideal masculine warrior. She wins because she integrates her intelligence, her compassion, her boldness, her improvisation, her devotion, and yeah, her femininity. This is where we can bring in Jungian individuation, the process of integrating different parts of the self into a more whole identity. Mulan's arc is not become someone else to survive. It's use disguise to enter the crucible, then emerge with a more integrated self. The disguise gets her through the gate, but authenticity wins the war. That is Grounded Mage gold right there. And from a self-determination theory lens, Mulan becomes most alive when three needs align: autonomy, choosing her own action; competence, discovering what she can actually do; and relatedness, acting from love, loyalty, and protection. She's never motivated by ego. She's motivated by meaning. That's why her heroism feels so grounded. Mulan still resonates because she speaks to a very modern psychological wound. The fear that the version of you that earns safety is not the version of you that feels real. That maybe the good daughter, the easy employee, the funny friend, the strong one, the nice one, the man enough one, the feminine enough one is a costume you learned because the room had rules. And Mulan doesn't give us the fantasy that authenticity is instantly rewarded. Actually, it gives us something more useful. It shows that masks can be protective, performance can be survival, adaptation is not always betrayal, and eventually, if you want wholeness, the performed self and the emerging self have to meet. That's the magic. Not be yourself in a bumper sticker way, but learn what parts of you were built to survive, what parts were buried to belong, and what parts come alive when the stakes reveal your truth. Before we wrap it up, I have a few questions I want to ask you. Where in your life are you performing competence, likability, or acceptability in a way that no longer feels true? Which parts of yourself were labeled wrong that might actually be strengths in the right environment? Have you mistaken adaptation for inauthenticity? Because sometimes the mask wasn't fake. Sometimes it was armor. What crisis in your life revealed a version of you that you didn't know existed? And what would it look like not to just survive the role, but to outgrow it? Let me know some of your thoughts in a comment. Mulan reminds us that identity is not always discovered in peace. Sometimes it's forged in contradiction. Sometimes you don't meet yourself in the mirror, you meet yourself in the fire. So, If this episode resonated with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. When in your life did pressure reveal a stronger, truer version of yourself? Or more painfully, what role are you still trying to survive? If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, subscribe, and follow the Grounded Mage on whatever social platform is your favorite, and share this with a friend who might need a little push to be a little more themselves. If you want more deep dives into the psychology, mythology, and hidden emotional architecture of the stories that shape us, you know where to find me. Next week, we are heading into the wilds of Middle-earth to talk about a man who spent years running from the very thing he was born to become. We're talking about Aragorn and the psychology of trusting yourself with power. Because sometimes the real question isn't whether you can lead. It's whether you believe you can carry power without becoming the thing that you fear. Until next week, fellow mages, make it make magic.